Kids got sick, got me sick. Long story short, went out and did 3 miles today. That under the hot sun definitely kind of cured me a little bit, at least gave me a little bit of energy to be able to make it tonight. But yeah, inshallah, I'll deliver a great presentation here on this fabulous human being that we're going to continue to uncover. Last week, we looked at how he got here. We went through his journey. We went through his era as a kafir. We went through his passion as a kafir. We went through his background, his lineage. And we left off right as the Shura of Abu Bakr's death had, presented Umar with the Khalifa. So that's where we're going to pick off. And this presentation today is not going to be in, you can say in English, chronological order. We are going to be looking at his virtues as how he handled himself and how he ruled as a caliph based on category. So we are going to look at his fairness, his justice. We are going to look at his opinions on free speech and criticism. A lot of times, unfortunately, now in the Muslim world today, that's a very important point we're going to come to later, is this: are you allowed to question your leaders? Well, Umar ibn al-Khattab gave us the answer to that. Of course you are. As long as it's something basically does not directly contradict the Quran and the Sunnah. You are allowed to have those open discussions. We're going to talk about Umar ibn Khattab's views on that. We are going to talk about his views on women, because we often hear from the West how much of a sexist religion Islam is, how Islam brutalized women, how Islam took advantage of women and all these things. So we are going to see, how Umar ibn Khattab handled the issue of women and the dignity in which he gave them, their respect and their opinion in terms of appointing women to positions of authority and positions of say in the Ummah. Umar Khattab led the way in doing this. So we are going to go through, first and foremost, his justice. And this is going to be a large part of where we're going to go today. And one story that came to mind during my research over him over the last years was a story of a man from Egypt who was beaten basically by the son of Amr ibn al-As. This man came to Umar and he stated basically, I had beaten the son of Amr ibn al-As in a race. And as a reward for that, he beat me. And he said to the gentleman, I am the son of noble people, meaning that you as a poor, low life have nowhere to beat me or to be on even level with me. So this case got brought to Umar ibn al-Khattab and he handled it in Umar fashion. He called basically for the son of Amr ibn al-As and himself as well. And he handed a whip to the Egyptian man and he stated, beat the son of noble people. Give him exactly what he gave you. And then when you get done, make sure that you strike the head of Amr ibn al-As. So we can learn here. I mean, again, the way that Umar, just like the Prophet ﷺ, approached fairness, it did not matter where you came from. This is a theme we are going to see today. Again, whether you were a slave, whether you were from a lower level tribe, whether you were someone of dignity or nobility or wealth, it did not matter. You were treated the same. Justice is what prevailed. In this case right here, you have a high companion of nobility, someone who was the son of the governor, couldn't get more authority or more prestige in those days than that. And yet still, he was in the wrong. And Umar ibn al-Khattab made sure that the ruling was fair. There was a famous story also that shows just again the anti-materialism and the way, much like Abu Bakr, almost to the same, we see this quality in Umar as well. They detested excess. They detested material wealth. They only cared about the akhirah. They only cared about the afterlife and pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was a famine that happened in Medina. They know it as the year of the ashes, where you had major droughts. And periodically, as it would during that time, food would be brought in to feed people from far away. And of course, you had good food, obviously higher quality food, and then you had not so higher quality. Well, ghee and yogurt and things like this were coming in. And it was presented to Umar here, oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, eat, you're a king, you're a ruler. Umar refused to eat. Umar said, I will not partake in anything. I will not eat or consume anything unless my entire ummah can consume it. That was the dignity, again, that he had. I mean, could you imagine a leader, again, as we always kind of want to put the mirror on who we have nowadays, even living to a tenth of this? I mean, he refused. He had the position to, during no matter whether it was a drought, a plague, war, it did not matter, supply chain interruption. He was going to eat as high on the hog, as the saying used to be in the South, as possible. But he chose not to. He chose to say, I am one of the people, no distinguishing in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala between me and them. I'm going to eat exactly like them. He would soak bread in olive oil, and he would go to bed periodically with his stomach rumbling. He fasted prolonged periods of time during these droughts, as well as other periods as well. And he shunned anything that would be considered to be excess luxury. There was even a time they saw Umar walking in the market carrying 2 heavy pails of water and sweating. And they walked up and, what's the Khalifa doing? Why is he carrying all this water? They asked him, they said, oh, Amir Mu'mineen, what are you doing? He said, well, people were complimenting me a lot. They were giving me praise. And I didn't want to, have, because we say now, my head get bigger. I didn't want to grow an ego. I always wanted to stay humble, in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He would go out and do menial tasks, helping people, to make sure that he realized, again, that there was no distinction, between him and the common man. Now, how did he act towards his family? Usually we see, and I've lived in the Arab world, I've lived in many Muslim countries, and family is very, very important, there. And you see favoritism all the time when it comes to family. And I think we all know from what we've seen from Umar so far how that went. His son was caught drinking wine in Egypt. So you would think here, okay, now this is an ultimate test we have right here for Umar and his convictions. Did he punish his son? Did he let him off easily? Did he treat him differently? Quite to the contrary, as we will see. Amr ibn al-As brought his son in private to carry out the had punishment for, wine consumption. Word of this got to Umar, and immediately Umar was enraged. He called, he said, what are you doing? Called for him. I gave you orders strictly to punish this man, regardless of who he is. He may be my son. It does not matter. The law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the law of the land. It doesn't matter who you are. And he ordered that the punishments be carried out in public in the same exact way that anyone else would. Because what would happen, of course? You would start getting wind that, oh, look at Umar. He's favoring his kids. They can do whatever they want. They can get away with everything. Highly, not the case, at all here, as Umar was strictly fair when it came to dealing with his son. Another example where we see of his justice was we had the tribe of Ghassan. This was a group that was under the Roman Byzantium occupation in Syria. They were a very big group. They had converted to Islam during the conquest, and the leader of this tribe had came to Mecca to do Hajj. And a poor man had actually stepped on his lower garment. And this offended this wealthy upper class man. He ended up hitting the poor man right in the nose, broke his nose, and was proceeding to attack him. Well, of course, word of this got to Umar, and the man of royalty said, this lowlife Bedouin disrespected me. I was in my rights. I'm here, he's here, and all this and this and that. And Umar, of course, again, was not going to have this. He immediately ordered retaliation against this man and punishment to be, administered to him. The man, when finding this out, he said, then what did I become Muslim for? I did not become Muslim to be like this man, to be made low. I became Muslim to be elevated and made high. And that was his very limited view, of the deen. And Umar basically continued to try to encourage him. The man finally said, I will go and be a Christian. And Umar said, well, then I'll strike your neck, right here. And the guy, of course, kind of backed off of this. And in the middle of the night, they all ran to Constantinople and they joined Christianity, because he felt that Islam was not the religion for him, that was not going to allow him to be here and allow everybody else to be here and him to be able to do whatever he wanted with pure impunity. And you can see, again, the case of justice, there that we have. When it came to freedom of movement, a lot of things we hear from the Western world was how oppressive Islamic countries are. They control every aspect of your life. Umar did restrict prominent Sahaba. He wanted them in Medina. And there was a lot of wisdom behind that, because he did not want to have various Sahaba and all the different learning centers becoming, you could say, revered, in the eyes of the people, which would glorify. This is kind of happened with Khalid ibn al-Walid, where he was starting to get this kind of deity status, in the eyes of the people. And Umar always wanted to keep everything focused on where it was, but he also wanted them there for their advice, because he did not want to take a decision, without going through a proper shura and getting as many fresh pairs of eyes, you can say, on the decision. So freedom of movement was something that was quite common, in the Muslim world. We also see the same thing with freedom of religious belief. Umar took this to heart and was very adamant at ensuring this. We hear, and you go to watch any Christian Muslim debate on YouTube, there's thousands of them. You will always see them say, oh, well, the dhimmis. What do you think of the dhimmis? You persecute the dhimmis, you tax the dhimmis, you do this and this and that. Well, you find in history, and before I got really heavily into Islam, I used to learn stories about Muslims and Jews together fighting crusaders. You would see stories of Christian groups and Muslims fighting other occupiers. So if the treatment was so harsh and they were so poorly treated, once a new force comes in, this is your opportunity to fight, against and liberate yourself. But history does not show that. And why? Because Umar granted them total freedom of religion. He granted them great treatment. I'll get to some cases later where we can see Umar taking the side, of dhimmis over Muslims, because it was what was fair in the eyes of the Quran and the Sunnah. He never imposed anyone. He would recommend, obviously, encouraging people to convert to Islam, but he would always hearken back to the ayah, there's no compulsion of religion. You do not force anyone to take anything. Another example of the jizya that we hear so much about was that the Muslims would take a share of what you had grown basically in your field. The rest was up to you. That was yours. It was a very generous portion. It almost aligns pretty much with the zakah. And when the Romans or the Byzantiums or these other groups would take you over, what would happen is it was like a feudal system where you would grow your own food, and that didn't even belong to you. That belonged to the king. They take it all. And whatever crumbs were left over, you could keep. But you grew food for the benefit of the royals. You weren't allowed to hunt in parts of Europe if it was designated the king's forest. That was the king's land. There was no ownership of any kind of property in that feudal system. So these Christians and Jews, when they had Muslims coming in, they were getting all these rights. Most of them had, of course, no objections to it at all. There's even a famous story of a blind man who came to Umar ibn al-Khattab and he said, sir, I'm old, I can't work. I can't keep paying this. Umar ibn al-Khattab threw the jizya right out and said, no, we are not going to exploit them when they're old. He removed all obligations. This happens several times to people who are disabled, people who are unable to widows, as well. You can find story after story of him doing this. The same way the Muslims applied the zakah for people who could not pay the zakah because of hardships, financial restrictions, they were absolved from that. And it was the same thing that we see, here with the jizya. Jews of Haibar and the Christians of Najran, we see another story here. These are people who time and time again broke treaties. The Jews of Haibar broke treaties when they were in Medina. Then they moved there. They were breaking treaties when they were there by supporting the enemies of Islam. Now, you would think after 2 or 3 times breaking the treaty, it would be kind of justified to take total military action. Well, the Muslims decided they must be purged from the Arabian Peninsula due to the infiltration, due to the likelihood of them breaking the treaty for the 5th, the 6th, the 7th time. But one of the requests that Umar had made was that when they were taking them out of the Arabian Peninsula and moving them to Iraq, was to make sure that the land that we were giving them was the same in terms of abundance, equal to what they had left. I mean, you find anyone in history who would treat someone who broke a treaty with them with such dignity and respect. And they want to say in some of these debates of, oh, the oppressive Muslims, look what they did because of some outlaw warlords here and there may have done some things. But when we talk about Islam, we're talking about what the Quran says. We're talking about what the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ says. And we're talking about how it was implemented, not what some tribe and, the northeast corner of Syria did. We are talking about what the religion ordains or mandates. Sorry, I had to get a drink, there. When it comes to ijtihad, Umar was very open with allowing ijtihads to be shared among the companions. Ali, Sa'd ibn Waqqas, Uthman. And we'll see this kind of balance, like we saw it with Abu Bakr. You had Abu Bakr was very kind and gentle, and on his right hand, he had Umar, who was very tough and strict. You had in this particular government, you had Umar, who was tough and strict, and then he had Ali, who was very ideological, very philosophical, would be the type, or very good orally, very good in terms of his calmness. We also had Uthman, who was very similar in personality type to Abu Bakr. So his advisors kind of counterbalanced his personality tendencies. You had the strict, you had the kind and the gentle, on one side, and Ashura was involved in everything, of course, unless it was a direct contradiction of the Quran and the Sunnah. So ijtihad was open, discussed. And then we have a very important story here of showing what it is when you make a mistake as a ruler and how you were to handle that. When we talk about matters of going against the Quran and Sunnah, there's a famous story, and this is happening today, where we have some sisters and their families. Oh, sorry, Sheikh. Things okay?
That's okay.
We have these ladies, unfortunately, and their families, unfortunately, who are asking for the brothers to pay dowries that are just absolutely insane. When I was living in Saudi, I had some Saudi brothers coming to me, and I'm asking them, why are you still single? And they're telling me, brother, I can't afford this. I mean, I need basically 50,000, US dollars, in order to give for a dowry. And I'm like, wow, his salary was probably that per year. I mean, so you're looking at how long it would take to save that. Umar was facing the same problem because all these riches from territories, all the war spoils were coming into the Muslims, and the Muslims were getting abundance of wealth for the first time, in their history. You always had some wealthy merchants here and there in Medina, but now you're talking about a widespread influx of wealth. So you were having ladies and their families asking for quite a bit of money. And he went in the masjid, he started screaming in typical Umar fashion, give it back, give it back. I mean, his heart was in the right place. And one of the sisters there quoted an ayah from the Quran, quoted statements from the Prophet ﷺ, and Umar backed off. He's like, you know what? I was wrong. I accept that. I cannot make you give it back. I cannot set limits on dowries. If a man wants to give a whole country and he's got the ability, there's nothing I can do. The Prophet did not, prohibit that. So you can see again his humbleness in acknowledging, A, I made a mistake. B, I'm going to fix the problem. I'm not going to be so infused with ego that I'm going to continue to be belligerent or hostile towards someone. I'm going to acknowledge mistake and we are going to move on. Speaking of marriage, another area that he was very strict on was he interpreted the Jews and Christians married to Muslim men. Now, what I found also in my travels around the world on this one, we see it in the modern day, where I was noticing in GCC countries, it's not quite uncommon, by the way, for Saudi or Emirati men to marry Christian Westerners. And you find that the Emirati or Saudi sisters are not allowed to marry Muslim Westerners. I've seen that phenomenon going on quite a bit. And Umar took the same stance on it that's been universally accepted by the scholars, is that we should love our sisters first and foremost. Our sisters are for us. They share the same deen. They share the same values and culture. We always should do whatever we can to make sure that we marry a good God-fearing sister before we even look or entertain any option. Now, the Prophet ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted this, but in certain contexts, allegiances, military allegiances being made between groups, you marry one of their daughters, it forges a bond or kinship. But again, the wisdom behind not doing that is betrayal, leading you to deviation. If you have a wife who is from another culture, another religion, maybe she thinks alcohol is permissible. Hey, honey, don't worry. God will forgive you. Let's go have a couple of drinks tonight. You're not going to have to worry about that if you marry a good sister. It's just not going to happen. But me personally, when I first got into Islam, I still was talking to a Western female. And that's basically what it was. I had to break that off because I saw that I'm trying to turn my life around. And this person is going to lead me astray. I mean, indirectly or directly. So Umar recognized that early on and did the best he could to stop it. A good story here also showing his humbleness was when he first was taking the reins. We talked about Abu Bakr refused even to take anything from the Bayt Allah until he was forced. Umar said, I want one beast so I can go to Hajj in Umrah. I want one winter outfit, one summer outfit, and I want just enough food to eat for my family to live. And then I want the same exact stipend or salary that every single Muslim in the Ummah is getting. That was all he asked for. He said, anything else, I will use my own wealth. He literally had one shirt, and there's numerous stories. My nephew may be watching me live right now. If not, he watches me on replay. He wanted me to mention the sleeping under the palm tree, which was another thing that Umar was famous for doing, was that he would sleep outside. We'll talk about the police force and the night patrols that they would do later, but just how humble and anti-material, he was. People would see Umar in public, and they would come up to him. And one guy in particular, he asked him, oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, why are you like this? Why are you dressed like this? And Umar took the leaf of a date palm and hit him on the head. And, again, the wisdom, in leading by example. How can you expect the people, if I come up here and I tell everybody be anti-material and I've got a Rolex watch and I'm driving a Bentley, I mean, how can you really come across with that message if you're not living it? And Umar lived it. Now, some accomplishments we have. One of the things, and this is a sad state of affairs, is that very few Muslims, if you ask them right now, could tell you what the date in the Hijri calendar is. I mean, we've become so westernized that our school systems, every aspect of our lives, the only place I ever saw a Hijri calendar being slightly used was in Saudi Arabia back in 2011. In Saudi Arabia in 2018, I never saw it again. But I used to see when I would go into an office or I would have meetings scheduled on the calendars, we would have the Gregorian and then we would have basically the Hijri dates on there. But now we don't see this at all. And Umar is responsible for putting this together along with the shura of companions. Ali ibn Abi Talib was very instrumental in this. They went through several options of what to use as a kind of start of that. Some suggested the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No one wanted to go that route after contemplation because it inflicted sorrow and reminded people of grief. You found some using Bayatul Ridwan as an example. Some wanted to talk about when the first revelation, but no one knew the exact really day or time because there was obviously no followers of Islam during that time. So Ali has suggested, well, when the messenger left polytheism, when he left paganism, when he retreated and he took sanctuary from that. And that's, of course, where we got our Hijri calendar in. We really need to do a better job of getting back to that Hijri calendar. I mean, the moon is a clock. I mean, when you think about the moon, I mean, this was a clock for man before we had electricity, before we had wind-ups and all the things that we have today. I mean, the moon was how you told time. And it was perfect. It was God's clock that he gave to us. And we've kind of lost that. You ask the average person, hey, what's the moon shape going to be like tomorrow? They'd have no clue. But you went back to the Hijri calendar, you'd have knowledge of that. Another thing that Umar had put into place is something we do every Ramadan, the Talawi prayer. And this is one of the accusations that the Shia routinely level against Umar, is they say that he did a bid'ah. When you can look at authentic hadiths, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam during Ramadan would be praying in the masjid all throughout Ramadan. And after the days went by, more and more people started to pour in, and they started praying behind him. And when asked, he said, well, I didn't mandate this for you because I didn't want to be too strict. I didn't want to overburden you, in the religion. So you see right there, it's clearly not a bid'ah. This has precedence in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's something that we have done, every Ramadan since. I mean, Talawi is now an integral part, of Ramadan. This again came from Umar ibn Khattab putting this thing together. Very good tale here again, his anti-materialist stance. There's a story in an authentic hadith. A Bedouin had approached him and he said, oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, can you please do something to help my daughters and my family? And Umar ibn Khattab said, well, why? Why should I kind of knee-jerk quick reaction to that? And the Bedouin said, because you're going to have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. Umar started to weep. This tough mountain of a man started to cry in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His beard became saturated with his tears. And he took off the only shirt that he had. I talked earlier, he had two shirts, one for the winter, one for the summer. He took off the only shirt that he had on his body and he gave it to the Bedouin. That type of conviction, I mean, is just something that we all, I mean, when hearing these stories, should really truly aspire to be. I mean, I always, when I read the lives of these men, I feel just sometimes disgusted with myself, when I think of how, stingy I may be. And I'm not even really stingy, but I mean, compared to this, I mean, this standard that he's setting here, I think we're all probably pretty stingy, when you look at just how he once described this world as a garbage dump. He was walking by with some companions and there was some garbage. And he said, that right there is your world. That's what you're chasing after, this decomposing, dying, waste. He's like, all this stuff is meaningless. In the end of the day, it's what's in the Akhirah. And he really took that, to heart in everything that he did. So much so, I mean, he struck a man one time walking in the market, with a mallet. And he said, move out of the way, Salama, as he hit him. And a year later, he came back. Salama was walking. Umar came back and he grabbed him by the wrist and he drug him into his house and he gave him 600 dinars because he remembered that and it had been kind of festering throughout the entire year. I did something wrong. I got mad at a guy for blocking my pathway in the market. I hit him. I shouldn't have done that. He went and searched this gentleman out a year later and gave him 600 dirhams, grabbed him by the wrist in Umar fashion, come, and drug him into his home and paid him back for everything that he had done. One of my favorite Umar moments was when Khusros was defeated. And they had all of his shoes, his cloak, his crown, all these jewels. It was always a custom in the time, if you conquered a ruler, that you were to wear, in pride, pump your chest out. We beat him and I've got all of his riches. And one of the accusations that Christians use a lot in debates against us is there's a hadith about the treasures of Khusros being opened up to the Muslims. And Christians will say, look, this is proof that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam invented Islam to conquer. So here now you have a situation, another hadith where you have the treasures of Khusros. What did Umar do with them? Did he sell them? Did he wear them? No, he found a tall Bedouin and he gave him the crown, the slippers, all the items of Khusros. And you had this man of the desert, no education, couldn't read, couldn't write, no money, walking around with a crown of a ruler of a once great empire, at least great in terms of power and size and wealth. I mean, only in Islam could you find something so humble, as that, to this ruler of the Muslim world giving the crown to a Bedouin, homeless, you could say. Bedouin in English, we translate as someone who is a nomad, who moves around, without a permanent residence. So again, very, very key story there. And living the life, one of my favorite hadiths by the Prophet ﷺ is the hadith that we should approach this world like a traveler. Umar quoted this hadith many times, and he lived by that mantra that you live this life in this dunya as you are just a traveler. You're sightseeing. You are not to partake in it. You are not to invest yourself into it. Don't spend, all this time, save money, gotta save money, gotta save money. I know I'm guilty of it too. We all do it, but at the end of the day, this is temporal. This is not, long. And he lived by that and he died by that. He would eat with the Muslims frequently, the commoners. And when he ate with them, did he take food from these, zakah? Did he take from the Beit al-Mal to pay for the meals? No. He paid for meals for the community out of his own pocket. He had no regard. We're going to get to his family here in a minute and how he was with his own daughter and his own wives, and how, a lot of them were like, Dad, you're just, you're a bit too strict, because they were seeing what other, people of wealthy, had been getting. And they're thinking, why our luck? We got the dad who doesn't, value material goods and stuff, but it's very rare to find such a person. There was even a saying again of his how humble he was. He was approached by a man in the market, and he said to him, after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you were the greatest man, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, who ever lived. And Umar made sure to stop the man mid-sentence. And he said, no, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He said, Abu Bakr was finer than musk when I was a kafir running astray and I had the scent of a camel. Something along those lines. Was just, again, how quick he was to not take praise. Don't ever, even say I'm better than Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr was better, was a believer longer. than I. Well, he was doing good deeds when I was whipping slaves as a kafir for saying la ilaha illallah. And he always had that in his heart. When he spoke about Abu Bakr, there was this love, that he had. Anything you want to add, Sheikh Ibrahim? I have a couple more sections left after.
Oh, mashallah, you do an excellent job, brother. I'd love to listen, inshallah.
So I hope everybody has never heard some of these before. I did a lot of research preparing for this, and I could make literally like 8 months almost worth of content from sayings and deeds, because it was so much. I mean, his Khalifa was 10 years. We talked about Abu Bakr. Unfortunately, it was only 2. Most of what we talked about with Abu Bakr was during the life of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But now with Umar, we're dealing with so much that's after, because his Khalifa was so long. One famous, I talked earlier about his family, and this is really the ultimate test of a man, how he handles power, how he handles favoritism. His own son, he favored Osama ibn Zayd over his own son when it came to stipends from the Beit al-Mal. His son is furious. I mean, Dad, how, come on, how can you do this? He said, because his father was dearer to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam than I or you. And that's how he handled it. This man's father was closer to the Prophet. This guy was a Muslim longer. He was a daughter. He achieved this, and this. This is how we reward. Doesn't matter whether you're my son, I love you to death or not. It has no bearing, at all on my decisions. One of my favorites on the family was a gentleman by the name of Abu Musa. A lot of this story is quite famous. He gave a gift to one of Umar's wives. He gave her a nice mat for the floor. Umar came home. He found the mat. He immediately started losing his mind. He brought Abu Musa in, took the mat, boom, right on the head. And he said, don't give my women folk anything, because he did not, again, want, my position should not lead to this. Don't be trying to, people think you're trying to earn favor from me. Later on, they'll say, oh, Abu Musa's got Umar in his pocket. Look, he's giving his wife's gifts. He didn't want any, because we know people talk. People talk in the office. They talk at school. This is how things get going. He wanted, again, none of that. Take the gift back. I don't want any part of this, and that was, how that was handled. When wealth would be brought to Umar from battles, Umar would immediately take the wealth and divide it as the messenger did. It would go to the Beit al-Mal. And his wives had questioned him, aren't we entitled to some of that? And he said, no, this wealth is for the Muslims. You inherit my wealth. And he clarified some misunderstandings when it came to inheritance and war booty, to make sure that his wives didn't think that because they were the wives of the Khalifa, they were entitled to this. No, this went to the Muslims. You're entitled to my wealth, as the husband, but you are not entitled to the wealth of the Muslims. I'm not want to get into Islamic figures later in history, but too bad after a few more leaders, we didn't have leaders like this anymore. That's just all I want to say on that point, that lived life to this extent. His son-in-law, one time, he requested money from the Beit al-Mal. Umar picked up his own wallet, gave him the money he was requesting out of his own pocket. There was, again, story after story, no example of favoritism. But he did love the wives of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You hear Shia, as we talked about last week, claiming he murdered Fatima. He murdered her baby. They claim that Ali hated him, even though we have so many stories of Ali being right there next to him in the Shura, him taking decisions from Ali, him consulting Ali. We see him giving gifts to Hassan and Hussein. We see all these types of acts of kindness that he was doing. And the irony, typical Umar here, when he was give the Prophet's wives different meat or things that would come in, guess who he gave the least share to? Hafsa. Again, he said, I'll give you the rest out of my pocket. So he always made sure that his own daughter, received less than the other wives. Again, just how committed he was to not putting out any false impressions. And we're going to kind of go in with a couple more things. And yeah, we'll have question and answer. We have pretty good time right now. I want to get rid of the care for women argument, because this is one of the things I mentioned in my opening that we hear time and time again in the West, is what a sexist religion Islam is, how it's men are barbarians. They walk around with a stick and they beat the wife and all that, nonsense that everyone who's been in the religion for more than a week, knows is just simply not the case. Umar's record with women would dwarf any of these so-called feminist men that you see nowadays. Feminist men will put "I love women" on their Facebook profile, or they will say something. But I judge a man by his action. You can go put a picture in your description box all you want. You can socially grandstand, look at what a great person I am. But at the end of the day, it's what you do. It's actually how you are handling this, what you physically are putting in. Umar would take care. There's one story here of a blind woman. One of the companions had saw there was a paralyzed blind woman, and he had seen Umar walking around in a certain area at night. And he's wondering, what is the Khalifa doing out at this late hours of night? And he kept noticing that there was a house over there. So he knocked on the door, and it was a paralyzed blind woman. And Umar went by her house every single night, much like we saw with Abu Bakr, where he was milking the goats of the elderly people. He would go there, talk to her. "How are you doing? There anything I can provide for you? Do you need me to get you anything?" Anytime there was a sister whose husband had died in jihad, Umar visited them all the time to make sure their needs were met, to make sure they had food for their children. Anytime women were lonely, because their husbands were away in in wars that were necessary, he would visit, he would send them stuff. You would find all this type of love and compassion. He even restricted, you don't even see the United States military doing this to this day. He would restrict the tours that the soldiers could fight so they wouldn't be away from their wives too long. He would have schedules to make sure that they returned. One of the more touching stories was there was a young boy who had came to Umar, and he was dying to fight jihad. It was his dream to be a martyr for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his family was mourning this tremendously, his elderly father and his mother. And they came to Umar crying, about how much they missed their son. He was all they had. They didn't have anybody else. They didn't have an abundance of children. And what did Umar do? He went right out and he sent for that boy to come right back and go back there and take care of his mother. He said, "You're being selfish because you want the good reward for yourself, but your best reward lies right here with your mother." And again, we hear that Islam was about conquest and conquering. You don't conquer very well when you're taking the soldiers away for moral reasons. So we can see, again, he trusted in Allah. He made the right moral decisions, and he took care, of the people. Again, that just shows, again, going a long history of Islam stories that we can see about how the value of the mother and how the mother is put so high, in the religion. I had one more. Try 1 second. Sorry for that. Oh, the slave girl story. That's the one I was looking for. This is another thing that we hear oftentimes against the religion, is we had slave women, or slave women were mistreated. There is another story of a slave girl who was going out there was a party of men. She was fetching some water from a well, and one of the men, wealthier men, went outside and he started to put his hands on her in inappropriate ways and was attempting to do very bad things with her. And she started to scream. And Umar ibn al-Khattab heard this, and he put something on the man, so to speak. He put discipline on this man immediately. And again, we see right here, choosing the side of the slave above the aristocratic wealthy man. You're not to put your hands on a woman in that way. It's just, of course, obviously goes to the heart of our religion and to our moral code. And it didn't matter whether you were slave or free, rich or poor. He was going to have your back. He was going to stand up for you and make sure that justice, was done for you. For 1 second. He would patrol the markets to ensure that people were not dealing in dirty trades. This is one of the signatures of Umar. He would walk the markets with a stick. And what he was looking for was to make sure that no one was practicing riba. He would go after the hoarders, which is one of the things I really respected when I studied his life many years ago. It was a common thing that a lot of the wealthy, what they would do was they would buy up, all of the goods, and then they would hoard them. And then when the merchants left, they would bring them back into the market, and then they would fix the price, and they would exploit the people. And Umar had put a stop to this practice completely. There was one story of a guy who was buying multiple pieces of beef, And Umar said, what do you need that for? He said, oh, for today, tomorrow, and the next day. And he said, give 2 to your brother. You know, don't take basically what you don't even need today. Take only what you need, your immediate need to survive. Do not hoard. And he was a constant to all the people who were trying to practice in dirty trades. They didn't want to see Umar to come walking, you know, with his stick, you know, over his shoulder. He also, through this, launched the police force. It was the first police force in the Muslim world. They would go out at night. They would make sure that nobody was going around trying to rob or steal property from people while they were sleeping. This is where a lot of the stories where he would sleep under a tree because he was so tired from all this effort and all these things that he was doing to make the world a better place. He just wore himself out. I mean, only to so many limits. And you ask yourself, as Sheikh Ibrahim said in the opening, why would someone want to kill, you know, a man like this? I mean, you see all these qualities. Now, yeah, of course, sometimes he's human. He was quick to get angry. He had a temper. We all do sometimes. But overall, you can see the virtues. You can see how he led, how he lived. And you have to say that you have to be a deviant person. You have to be somebody who is erring toward the side of the shaitan to want to see a human being like this killed. I mean, everything he did in his life was about making the world a better place. I talked about last week, 13,000 masjids, numerous centers of university. He brought the Muslim Ummah roads. I mean, the first highway system. He brought safety to those roads where a traveler could travel from one end of the Ummah all the way to the other without fear of being robbed and harassed, women from being captured and raped. I mean, he really brought order. The way he handled the treasury, some people didn't agree with it. He had a little bit different of a system. Abu Bakr was about giving everybody the same. Umar went on a meritocracy where he would give rewards based on how long you were Muslim, whether you were at Badr or Uhud, whether you were close to the Prophet. So that was kind of his system for handing out the rewards. But we can see today, I mean, with the virtues, how abundant they are. And next week, we're going to go back to the historical, not next week, the week after, inshallah. We are going to go back to the historical. We are going to talk about this man going to Jerusalem. And we are going to talk about the ultimate triumph. And we were going to talk about his untimely, you know, martyrdom, you know, unfortunately. So thank everybody for being here. Hope everybody enjoyed it. And we're always open for questions and answers.
Yes, so the followers, if you have a question, but I have to, before that, Brother Youssef, honestly, thank you and Jazakallah khair for that. A very good brother. In fact, I was waiting actually to say speaking about when he opened Jerusalem. And he's the first one for the Roman. I used to be actually like a garbage, garbage used to be in Masjid al-Aqsa. Imagine that. But Umar ibn Khattab is the number one he was at that time. But inshallah, next week, the following week, inshallah. Brother Youssef just mentioned it. Next week, inshallah, Dr. Daniel McBride. Dr. McBride is a doctor and chiropractic doctor and also published many Islamic books. Muslim, long time actually. I don't remember when. But he's my student, actually. I was teaching myself, Dr. McBride, and not a Muslim, actually was Muslim in Africa. But he came to America with his wife from Africa. He marry her, and mashallah, I make Umrah with him. And in the seat when the Umrah in the airplane, he have a form as a first book for him. So next week, bi'idni ta'ala, you meet Dr. Daniel McBride. And inshallah, and the following week, Brother Youssef will continue to speak about Umar ibn Khattab, inshallah. And don't forget to make dua for each other, brother. Your dua is almost accepted, especially now. Many people have a hardship and calamity. May Allah remove this hardship and calamity to everyone. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give shifa for every sick person. Ameen, ya Rabbi, ameen, ameen.
Yeah, I would like to, before we have a question, I want to say something. I was going to say at the opening, I got sidetracked. I know sometimes we have people from France. This week, I heard that the French government is now banning the abayas in the schools. The reasoning given was that they did not want someone's religion to be apparent. So I assume, I guess they mean if you're half naked in the school, that your religion isn't apparent. When that would be to me an obvious one. I tell all the sisters, do not comply. The same way I told people here with the COVID nonsense back in 2020, I never wore a face mask. I'm sorry, Allah, I love the way Allah made my face. I hope I'm handsome. I don't want to cover it up. with a dirty face mask, doesn't have any medical benefits either, by the way. That's a whole different topic for a different day, but I didn't comply from the beginning of it. I didn't comply to the end of it. They have no power. It's a paper tiger. It's all about just instilling fear in you, basically making you think you have to do it. They can't kick you out. Continue to wear your abaya. Sisters in Islam are the best blessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. A good, noble Muslim woman is very rare in this modern world, and I don't want to see any sisters out there in distress who are trying to do things the right way. You know, we don't need them, you know, in the end of the day.
May Allah save our sisters in France, Ya Rabbi. I mean, may Allah destroy this Macron, the president, and whoever supported him. May Allah destroy them. May Allah destroy those people. Ameen, Ya Rabbi. I mean, may Allah, lost brother and sister, inshallah, will leave right now. At the time, it's very fast, actually, especially. But inshallah, next week, instead 9:15 and 9:30, gonna be inshallah, most likely 9 o'clock, inshallah. I can see the schedule over there in South Carolina, and we'll decide and we'll let everybody know they'll be early, inshallah. And جزاكم الله تعالى خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير, brother Youssef.